My name is and if you're watching this, I have some sad news, and that is that unfortunately I have passed away. But before you get alarmed, don't worry, there is still some of me that lives on in a different form. What I mean by that is all this is kind of sort of dead to me, and it has been for a while. And I'm tired of carrying around all that dead weight. But what I'm actually into is a little bit more like this. So, my name is Erin, and welcome to my coming out video. And as you may have guessed by now, I'm technically transgender. But that's a kind of big scary word, so let's not worry about it too much. What I'd rather like to explain is what that really means and why I'm changing things about myself. So yes, I prefer to dress this way, and I like being called by the name Erin, E-R-I-N, and I consider myself and identify as a woman. So yeah, she is a pronoun that applies to me. Now, if you have a lot of questions, don't worry. It's perfectly normal, and I'm actually making this video to answer those questions, hopefully. And maybe there's things you wanted to know, but you didn't know how to ask, or you prefer not to know, but you're trying to understand anyway, or maybe you're just curious. Either way, it's chilled, and I hope to answer some of those questions. So let me start by telling you the journey that it's been like for me. I was raised in an era of scientific ignorance when it comes to gender, so I wouldn't say that the doctors or my parents had any ill intention or were purposefully doing the wrong thing, but the information they had was that you can tell what gender a baby is based on looking at its junk and stuff. And it's come to light recently in science over the past sort of 40 years that this isn't actually how gender works. But still, that science hasn't actually propagated throughout the medical field. So most people are still making those mistakes today. And that's something that hopefully can change in the future, but I'm not that upset about the fact that, I was sort of born in a time of that ignorance. It's more the results of that society than any specific person's desires or actions. So even though my parents and the doctors and all that were ignorant at the time, it still would have been nice to have been given a choice. Now, for some people, the fact that they're not given an option really doesn't bother them. They feel like what other people thought their gender was is a perfect fit. And the word that we have to describe that is cisgender. So if you've ever heard people talking about cisgender, all that means is that whatever it was that everyone else thought your gender was, that you also feel like that's perfect. But those people are actually quite lucky because according to science, our anatomy, our genitals, and our DNA and all that actually can't predict what gender will end up feeling is right for us, and that they took like a whole bunch of brain scans of people and they found there was no pattern between your sort of anatomy and the type of brain structure and thought patterns you would end up presenting. So that shows us that, gender is actually something that's psychological, and that means that it's part of your personality and it sort of exists in your brain. It's not anything to do with your outward appearance or your chromosomes, and even if people of different genders might like to appear different ways, there's not a sort of biological link, that's just a behavioral attachment. And as with everything else with our brain, things are moldable, plastic, and they change over time. So some things that we consider feminine today used to be considered masculine, and vice versa, and things will change in the future, and that's okay. But the idea that you can tell what gender someone will end up wanting to be based on their junk or DNA or whatever is actually quite a new thing, historically speaking, and it was a big mistake, scientifically being disproven, and unfortunately it's still going to take a long time for that education and information to filter into the whole of society and medical community. So I guess that's just the way things are, and hopefully they improve. But some people might not experience a change in their gender over their lifetimes, and that's cool too. Like many things in your personality might change and many might not. And if it doesn't, then that's actually going to be very convenient for you because for those of us who do experience gender non-conformity, things aren't always easy. When you feel like the gender that other people expect from you is not a good fit, the word that we use for that is transgender. And so it's not actually, when we say trans, we're not actually talking about a transition or anything like that, even if transitions do sort of happen a lot amongst trans people. It's actually a totally separate thing from being transgender, and you can actually be a little bit offensive to a transgender person if you assume that they want to transition. Some transgender people don't actually end up wanting to transition, and some can't for like medical reasons and stuff. So it's always better to just not make those kinds of assumptions. So basically, my whole life, I wasn't actually really that comfortable with masculinity. It always felt like something that was sort of beyond my reach and that I had to try and achieve instead of something that came naturally to me. And because it didn't come naturally to me, I was actually quite insecure about it. And that made me a little bit misogynistic, and I had a bit of a toxic masculinity vibe going on for a lot of my youth. And instead of embracing these desires I had for femininity, I fixated on femininity in other people. And if I had a strong desire for wearing dresses, I would draw design dresses and make those for my girlfriends or whatever. But actually, looking back, I can really admit to myself now that I wanted to be the one to wear those dresses myself. But I was indulging in these feminine activities or desires in a way that would sort of not be perceived as being a woman, because I wasn't admitting to myself that that's something that I should look into. And everyone else would discourage any sort of feminine activities that I might engage in as well. So even though I cried a lot and was very different from other people around me who were guys, I liked to go shopping, I liked to watch chick flicks, and all that time I just thought of myself as maybe more of a feminine man. I didn't actually even think that it was an option to be not a man or a woman, and I didn't think that it was an option to be a woman if you were already considered a man. And so I convinced myself that I was masculine, but I was just really, really bad at it. And that just added fuel to sort of a negative thought life I had. So when someone did get involved with me, I would get super jealous and obsessive about that relationship because I was getting my security from that relationship instead of from myself and being happy with who I was. And that ended up in me being quite immature and a jerk to people as well. And then something happened to me that really started to make my life feel worse and worse and worse. And that was that I was starting to go bald. And even though I had still seen myself as a man, up until then, if I had seen myself in the mirror or something, then I still kind of liked the way I looked. And my whole life I'd always been told things by other women like that I've got nice skin or good nails or nice hair or long eyelashes and all these things that were sort of feminine traits that maybe some guys would find offensive, but to me, whenever I got those compliments, they were actually very encouraging to me. And when I started to go bald, a lot of those also stopped because I sort of didn't really look pretty anymore, let's put it that way. And so that sort of combined in me really starting to hate the way I look and just be really depressed about the fact that, I wasn't looking nice to myself anymore. People weren't complimenting those things about me that I did like, and some of the things I liked about myself were changing. And so like as I was in my 20s there, I could barely look at myself in the mirror. And the older I got, it felt like I was getting further and further away from looking the way that I wanted to. And I guess, really was in a bad place. And yet at the same time, I was hypocritical because I had these toxic masculinity, like learned behaviors, where I had internalized a lot of the sexist sort of attitudes towards women. And I wanted to be a good person. I wanted to be ethical, but I just wasn't able to see how the things that I was saying or doing were like harmful to people. And so then I got into my 30s, and suddenly I sort of started to feel like I needed to get my life figured out. Like in my 20s, I was just sort of in autopilot a lot of the time. I wasn't making much progress on any of my personal like dreams. I was just basically working a lot then, like going home and like playing games or watching TV or whatever, and not feeling very fulfilled in life. And so in my 30s, I was like, hey, I don't know how long I'm going to live, so I need to start doing things that I want to do now. I need to start working on my side projects and stuff as soon as I can, and I need to start working on my mental health and getting into a better place in my mental health so that I could do that, so that I wouldn't end up getting to be a really old person and looking back and regretting not doing those things. But at the same time, I didn't really have any exposure to any of the studies about gender, and I didn't have any exposure to anyone who was transgender. So those weren't really even things I was thinking about. But one idea that I really couldn't get out of my head was, I think it's for comedy or whatever, but one of the things that they said, men have a nothing box where they can like literally not think about anything. And although I think that's probably really not the case, I think there's probably tons of women with nothing boxes, tons of men with nothing boxes, and tons of people who aren't men or women with nothing boxes, and tons with any combination of box or gender. But the fact that there were so many men in the community I was in that were like, oh yeah, that totally explains me, really made me feel sort of disconnect from masculinity, because it didn't apply to me ever. Like, I don't think I've ever had a nothing box situation. I mean, I've zoned out, but that's because I'm imagining things that are sort of on a different plane almost, not because I'm going into sort of a sleep mode or whatever. So that started me questioning if like masculinity was even like applicable to me, if everyone else was like, yeah, and I was like, no. So then I hadn't really been that interested in politics, but Bernie Sanders came around and got super popular, and I really got inspired by the possibility of a better world. And so I started to get into sort of politics online and debate with people, make online friends, and join these political Facebook groups and stuff. And in these groups, there were people who were like socialists and stuff. And the thing about socialists is they are super against hate for other people, and they're sort of pro diversity and stuff. So I was able to come across people of all a range of different backgrounds and genders, and so being able to meet people like that and talk about gender in general and the struggles that transgender people are having. I made some friends with people who were transgender, and started to see the things that they were saying about their own experiences and what what femininity meant to them, etc., why they identified as transgender and as women. And I realized that I owed it to myself to be honest with the way I felt about gender, that there was this disconnect. Then I needed to investigate it, and as part of my whole figuring myself out, figure out what my relation to gender was, even if it was still to be sort of like a man, at least maybe there was a different type of man, or anyway. I just kept remembering how I had been uncomfortable with masculinity as a child and had these desires to be more involved in things that girls are doing and be friends with girls, and being bummed that that wasn't a possibility because of the social environments that I was in. And, those were similar feelings that some of these other people had, and it really started to break down the misconceptions that I had about what it means to be transgender and what gender is. And so I was like, okay, let's see, maybe I am a little bit female and maybe I'm 70% masculine, 30% feminine. And so I was like, okay, well then, I'm non-binary, and so I decided to experience a little bit with femininity by painting my nails. I'd always liked to do that as a teenager, and when I started to do that, it actually started to make me feel cool. Like it was a real boost to my mental health as well. And so that was like, yeah, this seems like it's helping, to in, go and explore these feelings. It's making me feel better about who I am and more comfortable with who I am. And I was like, okay, why don't I make a new account to join all these political groups so I'm not spamming all my other friends and family with politics all the time, and I can make that profile with a feminine name and try it out and see if I like it. And so the name I went with was Erin. Throughout my life, I'd always been curious about different names. I also still kind of liked the one I had, but I just always used to play around with ideas and use different names online and stuff. And, that was also for like privacy and stuff. So as I was experimenting through my youth and stuff, I ended up feeling like I did think I wanted a name that started with the letter E. And so the obvious choice for that then would be Erica. But I kind of had a negative connotation with that name because a lot of people had called me that when they were making fun of me. And they used to say the ka part harsh and loud and stuff. And so it just was very jarring to me. And I remember that in high school, someone in my grade's name was Erin. And it was like, wow, if you just took the C and turned it over, you'd get an N. And that's like cool how it's such a small change, but it makes the name feminine. It's got like a nice soft feeling to it. And so I chose that, and yeah, I started to use that Facebook account, and it was again like another boost to my mood. I started to feel a lot better about myself even more, and started to think, okay, maybe 30% was a little bit conservative, and I got therapy initially just to deal with all the things going on and see if I was making stuff up or if this was like a real thing, and etc. And yeah, it helped to go for therapy and find out that yes, these feelings aren't actually that uncommon or whatever. And it's perfectly normal. It's just something some people experience. And so one of the things that I thought I might try at that point was to try shaving my beard off and see if that made me feel more feminine. But when I did that, it sort of didn't, because it just made me feel younger. Like I still had short hair at the time, and the actual act of shaving just reminded me of school, where I used to have to shave every day when, I was super thinking that I was like a man and stuff. So shaving didn't really feel good to me, and I ended up just growing my beard again. There's even people who are born and given the gender woman who have bodies that would traditionally be called women, but they end up growing beards, and it's sort of unfair to them if we say that beards are something that's only for men. So I didn't really see the fact that I had a beard as getting in the way of all this other stuff. And as you can tell now, it's still not getting in that way. But then I decided that, if that's not really doing it for me, maybe I should try wearing some feminine clothing. And, it was quite scary, but, eventually worked up the courage and asked, and my wife helped me to order some stuff online, and I started to wear like skirts or like shirts and stuff that are more feminine at home, and that was ridiculously good for my mood and was like the happiest I've felt in years. But it felt right to me. It felt good. It felt like I was reconnecting to a part of me that had sort of died, and that I hadn't actually been able to be whole and happy with who I was, while that side of me was just being ignored by me, and I was sort of replacing it with this almost like fake persona of who I thought everyone else was gonna see as being um, a sort of cool man who was feminine but not a woman or whatever. But who knows what I had in mind. It was complicated, and this is way simpler if you ask me. Because as I became more and more comfortable with the feminine side, I actually realized that the masculine side of me had been an act all along. And although, there's a lot of the things that people might call masculine that I'm still interested in or still do, I'm still wearing a beard. Sometimes I still enjoy wearing masculine clothing and stuff. So it's not like that's completely gone from my life, but it's just that's not what I want my defaults to be, if that makes sense. So before I end the video, I wanted to do a little bit of a Q&A session and answer some of the questions that you might have. And there might be questions that might sort of be awkward or whatever to ask. So some of the frequently asked questions that you might have. So starting with pronouns, yes, it would be nice if you used feminine pronouns for me. But you know what, if you make a mistake or it just isn't coming naturally to you, that's okay. I'm not going to be offended. I know people make a big deal about pronouns, and for some people it's more important than for others. For me, it's more a case of we're all human. If I can see that you're trying, it'll mean a lot to me. And if you don't even try, then it's more your own perception of me that's wrong more than anything that really affects me, if that makes sense. So if you want to, you can call me she and her. If you want to, you can also use gender neutral terms like they, their. That's always safe to use for anyone, I think. But moving on to the next question, what about hormones? Because, as I said earlier, a lot of people think that sort of hormones and surgery and transitioning and stuff is the same or really always happens with people who are transgender. No. Sometimes it happens, and when it happens, it's the same as what I was saying, where wearing sort of feminine clothing boosts my mental health and stuff, makes me feel more comfortable. That's why people get hormones or surgery. And, I really feel like if the clothing helps, then hormones will too. But I don't have any plan for like surgery at this stage, and a lot of people don't end up going for it. It is a big deal. Surgery is always something that you can't rush into, I don't think. And if I can be happy without it, then I can be happy without it. Why do it? So for now, I'm only really feeling like I should try taking hormones, and that isn't actually to try and prove that I'm a real woman or whatever, and that isn't to try and change myself so that I can look and pass as someone born traditionally what we traditionally consider as a woman. No, I mean, if that happens, it's great, but that isn't why. It's just that when I embrace my feminine side, it makes me feel good. It's really that simple. You might be wondering if this means I'm still straight or not straight, or am I gay now, or what's going on. So in terms of the way I feel about other people who I found attractive and all that kind of stuff, nothing has changed. I'm still attracted to women predominantly, and the word I describe isn't the most important thing in the world, but what I feel like fits for me is the word lesbian, just because I see myself as a woman and I'm attracted to other women almost exclusively. But I think what really matters is that I'm still attracted to my wife. So the next question is, am I going to change my name and gender legally? Well, I would like to look into that at some point. Maybe when the hormones kick in, I might start to look a little bit different, and I might want to change what marker is on my ID, so that, for practical reasons, I don't get asked questions like, who is this? Doesn't match up, whatever. As I said earlier, I'm not going to get offended when people make a mistake. It's more about making it easier and for admin reasons. So if I did start taking hormones, wouldn't that be dangerous, you might be thinking? And no, it's not really dangerous. What people operate under in this country is sort of supposed to be the informed consent, which is you get informed about, all the risks and side effects and all that stuff. Then you sort of give consent, and that's really all that is needed for you to get like the prescription. Although, even though that is sort of the official stance, what ends up happening anyway is that, you end up with a doctor or a therapist who is monitoring you. And so for me, I do have a therapist monitoring my mental health, and I have a doctor monitoring my physical health and making sure that everything's cool. So I might start looking a bit different, but I think it'll make me happier. So am I worried about what people will think? A little bit. Like, I think I am going to start getting a lot more people being rude to me in public if I were to sort of dress this way out and stuff. But, I don't want to live my life based on fear, and I'll try to do what I can to stay safe. But at the end of the day, none of us are really safe, and there's no guarantee that no one's going to be rude to us anyway. Just is the way it is. I don't need to hold back on my own personal growth just because other people don't like the way it's going. So, and what about my hair? Well, honestly, the balding is kind of a big bummer for me, but I think I look okay with a beanie on, and I've really enjoyed growing my hair out. And as you can see, I can also wear wigs, and that's fun as well. And yeah, I am covering something up, but we are all covering stuff up when we go out in public and stuff, and it's not such a big deal. Maybe if I were a man, I'd worry about not being man enough, but yeah, I don't have to worry about that, do I? And so, yeah, if you don't know me that well, you might be wondering, but what's in your pants? And the answer to that is basically that, it's kind of not really any of your business. Yeah, that's something that's actually not really that nice to ask transgender people. So that I thought, I'd just answer chat anyway in that way, so basically not to ask. It's kind of, that is the more personal side to being transgender, I think. You can probably use your imagination. I just don't get why people get so fixated and focused on what's in other people's pants all the time, but maybe that's just a bad habit society has gotten into. I guess the last thing I wanted to talk about is just, if you're one of the people that I came out to who sort of didn't really believe me or thought that I was trying to get attention or something, and maybe you've had some time to process now and you can feel like, okay, sorry about that, you obviously weren't messing around there, and that's fine, no hard feelings, and you're welcome to get back in touch with me. And you can ask any questions you want. If something is a touchy subject, I'll just be like, hey, please, let's not cover that one. But I do want to be there to answer questions, and I do want to help people understand why I'm saying these things, doing, what's going on. Like, I think it's something that we all just need to eventually learn, so that people can just be comfortable with being themselves, and it's always better not to sort of jump to conclusions and stuff, I think. And if you are a little bit taken aback and this is a little bit too much for you, then you're welcome to take your time and not try to fake being happy for me, or that you like me still or whatever. But you know, but it's chilled. I'm doing this now and making this video and telling people because I've figured out that this is right for me and this is what I want to do. And if other people in my life aren't on board with that, then that's okay too, because not everybody has to walk the same path throughout their whole lives together. Sometimes people drift apart, and all that kind of stuff is just a natural part of life. And other people join you and come and go. And the people that have stuck by me, and the people who even, and especially the people that I have come out to who have stuck by me, you are the real heroes who've really helped me a lot, and thank you so much. But yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to cover, and I know that this was kind of long and stuff, but yeah, it's imagine me trying to say all this to people over and over again, and some people are like living far away, or they haven't met me in a long time and they just don't really want to have this conversation with me in person. But it's just good, I think, for people to know. And maybe you've had similar feelings, and you can also examine your own gender assumptions about yourself or others. Maybe you can start to try and be better ally to us, like using gender neutral pronouns more and not just assuming and stuff like that. But this is something that society is slowly starting to learn, and welcome to the party. That's about it. And yeah, again, thank you for watching. If you do have more questions, really ask away. Yeah, bye.